For the Democratic Party to win elections, it needs to reach mainstream voters, not just those who pass all the progressive tests. It's still true that the path to winning back the House of Representatives runs through center right leaning districts. And there is a way to put some longtime safe Republican districts in play. Joining me to talk about this is Lauren Harper Pope, co founder of the Welcome Pac, a group of strategists who come from across the political spectrum and from a variety of geographies and partisan backgrounds, with the goal of protecting our democracy. Lauren Harper Pope, welcome to Truth in the Barrel.
Thanks, Amy. So nice to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I want to we're going to get to politics and to the theory for victory that you have in races around the country. But I want to start with you and your background. You have roots in, is it South Carolina and Texas? Is that right?
Yeah, largely South Carolina. I grew up in South Carolina. I actually still live like 20 minutes from my hometown in TK, but went to the University of South Carolina. So proud Gamecock, big Gamecock football fan. So excited for football season. And yeah, I spent 2 years with my husband in Texas, just kind of, exploring and doing something different. But Texas was way too hot for me. So we came right back home shortly after we got married. So
yeah. And how did you get into politics?
To give you a long story short, very accidentally, I say by accidentally and by the grace of God, because I was studying public relations at the University of South Carolina. University of South Carolina is in Columbia, South Carolina, which is the capital of our state. And so I found myself getting opportunities for internships that were government related. So I interned for former Mayor Steve Benjamin, who I worked for after college, interned for a state house rep and then Senator Rand McLeod, interned in a lobbyist firm, and just had like a variety of internships and opportunities before I graduated that were very public service facing. And I was like, this is really cool. And I knew that with my career, I could do anything, right? And so I was like, do I want to, just go make some company money, or do I want to do something that I think is going to genuinely add value to the world around me? And I thought that public service would be the right way to do it. So that's the route I went.
Yeah. And you are the co-founder of the Welcome Party, the Welcome Pac, and I know you're going to tell us a little bit about that. But what I love, one of the things that I love about your pack and your party is that you have a strong research arm, and you identify races around the country where Democrats can win with the right type of candidate. So can you share some of that analysis, or just tell us a little bit about what the Welcome Party is all about?
Totally. And I always want to preface everything I say with the Welcome Party is not to make a third party. We are not Elon Musk trying to make some new party or even forward party. But say all that to say, we are trying to make a more welcoming Democratic Party, right? So when we started the Welcome Party work, my co-founder Liam Kerr and I, again, I was in South Carolina and he's based outside of Boston. So he was doing work in New Hampshire. So this is back in 2019, early 2020, pre-COVID. And we're saying, hey, what can we do to try to get more people to vote in this Democratic presidential primary, right? And so we were, South Carolina's first in the South, New Hampshire's first in the nation. And so we were saying, let's try to do something where we can get more of a representation of this electorate in this state, particularly in states like ours that don't have that have open primaries, I should say. So, and we knew that, if less ideological voters are not getting reached out to, then they're probably not going to participate in this primary. And we did a survey early on with the Welcome Party work to voters in these states. And we found that like less than 1 in 4 of the least ideological voters in the state were getting contacted by campaigns, right? And this is when everybody and their mom ran for president, right? So I was working for Beto at one point. You had Kamala Harris, you had Joe Biden, Bernie, like you had everybody running for president. And these people in South Carolina weren't getting contacted by a campaign. Like that sounds nuts, right? But they weren't, because they were, scored differently in GP Van. So we were saying this effort to say, let's get more people to vote in this primary. And then so fast forward to 2021, we started our PAC. 2023, we started the Welcome Democracy Institute, which is our 501c3, to your point about the research. And so we do this thing called, we call it the Congressional Competitive Index, where we actually score what are the most competitive and least competitive congressional districts in the country. So we release those report quarterly, and we say, is anyone challenging this Democrat that could be challenging this Democrat? Is anybody challenging this Republican that could be challenging this Republican? And our research early on identified in 2022, California's 41st, Ken Calvert. No one had run a competitive campaign against Calvert basically in 30 years. And then Lauren Boebert, who was, one of our favorite villains in Congress, but she actually was in a pretty decently competitive district, right? So that was a cycle we supported Will Rollins and Adam Frisch in 2022, and then obviously again in 2024. But again, like when you talk about the research, it's like the numbers are always out there, right? Like the data is always out there. It's just a matter of how do you want to dig into it? How do you want to compete? Right. And our original report was called the Conceding Democracy Report, where we were saying, look, Democrats are actually conceding democracy to these MAGA Republicans because they're not actually putting up a race against them. Right. They're running candidates who are raising, $30,000 to run against a Republican incumbent. They're not running real races. Right.
Right.
So we were trying to find who could be, this centrist Democrat who could run against a MAGA incumbent and actually beat them. Right. And so that's how we got all started.
And it's really important today, right? Because just in the next cycle, there's not that many seats that Dems need to pick up to win the House of, right? I mean, in order to hold this administration accountable. So it's doable.
Yeah, it's totally doable, and we could have had a House majority a few cycles now in 2022, 2024, and then hopefully in 2026. But to your point, like it's very doable, right? And so when we talk about Welcome Pac specifically, our work focuses on what we call, you mentioned in your intro, like conservative leaning or center right districts across the country. So we're not like, specific to any state or even any region necessarily. We're just like, hey, what are the most competitive districts out there? And how do we find the, most vulnerable Republican incumbents who are just simply out of touch with their districts, right? So places like last cycle, Pennsylvania's 10th with Scott Perry when Janelle Stelson ran against him. She had one of the closest races in the country, and if she had won, she would have been one of the huge decision makers for regaining House majority last cycle. But say all that to say, like, Harrisburg, that PA10 area, like that was vulnerable, right? It was a place that Scott Perry was very out of touch with his voters. And, he was voting against like protective gear for firefighters. It's like, dude, who does that, right? Like a firefighter of all people are like the most well-liked public servants out there, right? So, we're finding places that are opportunities for Democrats to truly compete and running what we call aggressively centrist Democrats against those Republicans.
Yeah, because, like Lauren Boebert and Scott Perry are super duper far right, like mega. And their districts are not R plus 50. I mean, they're not necessarily swing districts, but they're not super duper red. And so if you can get the right candidate in there and really expose all of the sort of craziness of the incumbents that are in there to the voters there, you have a really good shot. Why did you name your group the Welcome Party or Welcome Pac? What is that all about? What's the welcome piece?
Yeah, so we originally named it Welcome because if you think about like the welcome party for a wedding, right? It's like the first time everybody's getting together, you're meeting everyone. It's like a fun time, right? So one of the big things about our brand is we want to be welcoming, we want to be empathetic, and we want to be fun, right? Democrats are, the approval ratings in the gutter, and people perceive us as just this elitist, out of touch, unfun, hall monitor party, right? And I'm saying all these things. Other people have said this. I'm not the only one saying these things. But when you think about a brand, you want someone who's going to be like, I want to go to their tailgate, right? Speaking of football season, that's where I want to hang out. So we wanted to be welcoming, and then specifically wanted to be welcoming as a Democratic coalition to Republicans who are more moderate, right? So you're like business class, whatever Republicans. They're not like super MAGA and conservative Trumpy. They're just Republicans, right? They're regular conservatives. And then also swing voters, right? Independent voters, particularly independent voters, which obviously we're having an increasingly large number of our electorate become quote unquote independent voters or unaffiliated voters for that matter. So we wanted to be welcoming to these Republicans and independent voters into the Democratic coalition. But now, increasingly, particularly as 2024 cycle has passed, like we're trying to be welcoming to Democrats in our own party, right?
Mm.
And I say this again as a red state Democrat who is a very conservative Democrat, someone who's much more usually to the right of most Democrats on any given issue. And I feel sometimes unwelcome in my own party. And so I'm like, I'm sure there are plenty of other people. I have plenty of friends who feel this way. So what am I doing? What are we going to do to ensure that Democrats who are conservative leaning, even moderate Democrats, still feel welcomed as Democrats in this party? Particularly when you talk about people of color, younger people who are trending independent, right? Like, I'm not going to get into, taking for granted the Black vote. Like, hey, like we're usually more moderate than progressive. So say that to say,
Yeah.
welcome. We wanted to be welcoming. So that was
Yeah.
the ethos. That was the brand of like, come on in. We're a centrist family. And one thing I do want to hit on is like, we are what we call partisan centrists, right? You can be a centrist. You can, not have a party affiliation, but it's actually a lot more valuable for you to be a partisan centrist. So someone within a certain party who is specifically with that party. We had a conversation on my podcast, The Depolarizers, last year with Dee Kuo, who's a scientist and researcher at Stanford. And she was talking about how the parties have become so hollow and they just kind of are just shells for party activity, right? Like, oh, the DNC is doing this and they're having this convention or whatever. Like they're just shells really, right? For just party activity. They don't actually have the robust infrastructure that they were intended or created to have. So say that to say, you should, this is her argument, which I agree with, but she said, instead of becoming an independent, why don't you become just a more independent minded person within a party? So if you want to be a conservative, be an independent minded Republican. If you want to be a Democrat, be an independent minded Democrat, right? Just stick with the party so that the party has more flavor, more robustness, right? Because even to what I was saying about people leaving the party to become independents, they're leaving the party because they find the party going away from them, right? But if you stay within your party infrastructure, you're forcing the mechanisms of this party to take you seriously, right? To consider you, right? Because if you're part of the Democratic primary electorate, you're going to have to, people are going to have to listen to what you have to say when it's time to come out to vote.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we know, like, the New York Times reported just recently in the last couple of weeks that the Democratic Party is facing a voter registration crisis sort of around the country. Why do you think this is happening?
I mean, basically everything I just said, right? The party has become more progressive than the median Democratic primary voter, right? And so when that happens, people are like, I don't want to be with them, right? I'd rather just, be my own thing, be an independent, right? And that's, if anyone wants to do that, that's fine. But again, it forces, when you stay within a party, it forces the party to have to earn your vote. And to have to earn your vote, they're going to have to change policy, messaging, branding, decision-making, rhetoric, to become the people that are willing to to become a party that is what people want, right? And so one thing that I do talk about a lot is depolarizers, right? And so this is the name of my podcast, but it's more of just like a program within Welcome, because depolarizers are people who are able to win over an array on the spectrum of voters because they are depolarizing in their rhetoric, in their action, and their behaviors, right? So people who are willing to not vote with their party, but prioritize local place-based issues, right? So particularly for members of Congress, if you're Marie Glueson Perez and you're voting against student loan debt cancellation, because it's not something that your district values or prioritizes, because for whatever percent of people who actually go to college in your district, you're going to vote against it because that's not what your district wants, right? And you'll get backlash. She literally had people on Yelp talking, giving bad Yelp reviews to her family's auto body shop, right? Because she was trying to be a depolarizer, prioritize her district over the party's priorities, which were, again, probably misplaced in that anyway. And she got backlash for it, right? So depolarizers are not always rewarded with, fun hugs and kisses on Twitter and everything, but they are rewarded by her getting reelected this past cycle, her being able to show her differentiation from the Democratic brand that is so toxic at this point.
Yeah. And you talk about the fact that Democrats need to sort of reject purity tests to welcome this majority that can actually win. Can you give some examples of what that means to folks?
Totally. So our friends at Third Way actually have a few memos of like, throughout the questionnaires and don't take pledges, which I'm like, heck yeah, like let's do that, right? But when it comes down to the democratic infrastructure, over the past several years, it has just become like this, like check a box party, right? And it's like, do you agree with this? Do you support this? And it's like, what even is this, right? I call it like the Build-A-Bear party. Like we're literally just trying to build people who can check all these boxes, have this color skin, be this gender, whatever, right? And it's just like you are checking all these boxes, but completely missing the point, right? And so you're not actually able to relate to voters. You're putting yourself within these confinements that are keeping you from actually relating authentically and genuinely with voters. And so when you think about purity tests and whatever, like one thing that we've been big on is like we don't have a questionnaire for our PAC, right? Our campaign, our welcome team has met with like 60 something campaigns in 2020 for the 2026 cycle already this year. And at first I was like, what the heck is going on? How are we having all these calls? But it's been really valuable to meet so many people and understand better what the ethos and the thought processes are for the 2026 election cycle. But I say that to say, we don't have a questionnaire for Welcome Pac. So you're not going to see one. If you see one, it's not real. So send it away because it's not real, right? But we have conversations, right? And obviously we have an array of questions that we typically ask people. So we say, hey, what is something that you're frustrated with the Democrats about, right? What frustrates you about our party? Or what are some things that if you had a Democratic president in office that you would probably break with your party on based on past priorities, right? What would you have broken with Biden on for that matter?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like specifically, like what would be votes that you might be one of like 10 Democrats to vote with Republicans on because it matters to your district and it's something that's actually genuinely authentic to who you are as a person, right? Don't forget the personhood when you run for Congress, like continue to be you.
Right.
So say that I'm speaking to someone who knows this already, but
well, I mean, I think about that a lot. I mean, I'm somebody that, for example, national security is kind of my thing, and I'm a very strong like person when it comes to we need a strong military. We need to fund it. We need to stand up for Ukraine, for example. In my belief, we could have maintained a modest presence in a place like Afghanistan and not had it fall. But I mean, you have to look at who you are as a person and also the district that you want to represent.
Totally. But yeah, so going back to the questionnaire purity test thing, we just have these conversations, right? So we try to understand who people are, where they're coming from, and I try to tell people like, look, one, you're in a safe place, right? Because when people have conversations with a lot of PACs, they're in the DC mindset. I call it the DC mindset, which again, no offense, I have a lot of friends, lots of people I love in DC, but they think like DC, right? And so I'm like, look, this is a safe place. If you got a hot take or a spicy take, lay it on me, right? I'm probably to the right of you anyway, right? So like, let's talk about something way that is safe and authentic to you, and don't feel like you have to walk on eggshells with us because you don't. Like our team is pretty chill, right? And then say all that to say, some of the more questionnaire type thing. I mean, I'm sorry, not questionnaire, but more the conversation things that we have with our the candidates that we're talking to is, what is a policy that is differentiated from the Democratic brand for you, right? It doesn't have to be anything specific, right? We're not saying, oh, you must break with the party on this. Like, we don't really care what you break with the party on. It could be something that's not actually a policy, but more of a values-based thing, right? But let's have a conversation about where you differentiate with the party, because if you're 100%, gung-ho Democrat, then like, quite frankly, you're probably not going to win in this type of district. And you're also probably not going to be anyone who appeals to these types of voters. So we've just been very honest and very frank with people. And again, we've had some conversations where we're like, that went nowhere. And like, this person just wants to be a regular Democrat, and that's fine. That's what you want to do. Again, be you, honey, be you. But when we're looking for a very specific type of candidate, these are the questions we try to surface and understand better. Again, place-based politics, what are the issues that are specific to your district that are may not be on the national radar, but something that you intend to espouse and support in your campaign.
hmm so you had you had like a convention this summer where you brought in folks who have been able to win in, you know, purple, red districts even. How did that go? I mean, what was the most impressive piece out of bringing everybody together and talking about these things?
Well, first of all, it was a great time. Again, we like to have a good time. So it was called Welcome Fest. So basically, a festival where we gather over performers and we cultivate a centrist faction, right? So I don't think I mentioned that yet, but Welcome is very into centrist faction building. Progressives have their faction, love it, bless it. Centrists, we also have our faction. What are we doing to grow and strengthen a robust centrist faction? And we co-hosted and partnered with several organizations to do Welcome Fest. So we were like, look, this is not just a welcome thing. We want to make sure that everyone knows that you're a critical piece of this puzzle, right? We can't do it without New Dems. We can't do it without the Blue Dogs. We can't do it without Third Way, PPI, all of our friends, right, in the center. So we try to ensure that people know that like this is a group effort, team project, right?
hmm
So say that to say, Welcome Fest was awesome. We held the first Welcome Fest last year in 2024 with the theme of for the people in the middle. So it's kind of a play off of the Harris campaign of for the people, Kamala Harris for the people. So like we're like, look, for the people in the middle, this is us, right? And then this year's Welcome Fest, we doubled the size of last year. So last year we had about 300 folks. This year we had 600 folks, and it was just incredible. The theme was responsibility to win, right? So how are we taking responsibility to win in these districts and just generally speaking as Democrats? So we had some awesome speakers. The Blue Dogs, Marie Wilson Kemp Perez, Jared Golden, Adam Gray spoke. Several New Dems, Kristen McDonald Rivet, Janelle Stelson, Tom Swazi, Rebecca Cook. I think I'm missing one on there, but you know, we had Jake Auchincloss, we had Richie Torres, we had Alyssa Slotkin. Like it was just so fun, right? We had like all the folks, right? And obviously there's several other people that weren't able to mention or feature this year that we intend to, you know, bring into the loop for next year's Welcome Fest. So if you weren't there and you didn't speak, don't feel bad. We'll invite you next year. It was just a really good time, right? And we were able to, again, explore overperformance, right? So Laksha Jain from Split Ticket did a presentation on, you know, like war and overperformance and what types of candidates overperform, and found things like, look, if you look at the explicit data on overperformance, Janelle Stelson is actually a bigger overperformer than AOC, right? Because she's more moderate, right? Moderate candidates win, particularly in these types of districts. And granted, Janelle didn't win last cycle, or hoping that she wins this cycle, but those things matter, right? Your ability to relate to voters, meet voters where they are, not just geographically, but ideologically, it really does matter. And when we coalesce around an agenda that is very people focused, that is taking the 80 on the 80-20 issues, like those are the simple things, right? There's like a
Yeah.
lot of things that we could do. We could try to contort ourselves, twist ourselves into these boxes and become whatever that people want us to be. Like, no, let's just be genuinely authentic and let's be with voters on the issues. Let's care about what they care about. Let's prioritize what they prioritize. Let's talk about what they talk about, right? And, you know, our friends at More in Common, they have always, you know, been putting these things out about like, what are voters' perceptions of the parties, right? And they talk about often, you know, voters perceive Republicans to have priorities like immigration and healthcare and stuff like that. And that's actually what Republicans talk about. And whereas Democrats, they perceive Democrats to prioritize like abortion and LGBTQ and climate, when Democrats, that's not exactly what they prioritize, but that's what voters perceive them to prioritize, right? So how do we reframe our messaging so that we're actually, again, meeting voters where they are on the issues and speaking to them about the things that are genuinely of utmost concern to them.
Yeah, and those issues depend on your district too. I
Totally.
mean, you know, if you're running in New York City, it is different than running in, what is it, Pennsylvania 10,
Yes. Yeah.
for in Harrisburg area. So if people want to get to know more about the Welcome Pack, I know you have a Substack, which is really good. You guys do some good research and good writing on some of these topics. But also, if they want to support you or learn more about what you do, where should they go?
Well, yes, welcomestack.org. Please follow us on Substack. Welcome Stack is where we put out the majority of our information. And we have this thing called the Win the Middle slate, right? So this is much more into like the electoral fundraising piece of things, but We've endorsed 7 candidates thus far for the 2026 election cycle, people that we're super, super stoked about. So I've named all of them already, but I'll name them again. Some Regals, Jared Golden, Adam Gray, Rebecca Cook, Janelle Stelson, Tom Swazi, and Kristen McDonald-Ribbett. So we have 7 so far. We're looking to add a few more Democratic challengers for this upcoming cycle, but trying to be very, again, intentional, right, about who we're selecting, who we're supporting. Again, there's been some candidates that have knocked our socks off, and there's some other candidates that were like, what just happened, right? So we're trying to encourage people to, I always tell people, like, be the change that you want to see, right? Like, if you're frustrated about something, don't perpetuate bad habits, right? Don't do stuff that other people are doing that makes you annoyed, right? Because then you're just a hypocrite, right? So let's talk about things in a way that, again, are very compelling, very authentic, and very genuine. And let's win the middle, right? Let's win people over. Let's win in these conservative leaning districts. Let's regain majority in the House, right? And let's also, again, reframe and reclaim a brand in the Democratic Party that is something that people actually want to be behind, something that actually people want to associate with, right? If someone doesn't want to come to your tailgate and associate with you, that's a big problem, right? So let's talk about things in a way that are actually going to meet voters where they are and, earn their trust again.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. This is such an important issue because we've got to reach out to everybody who is in the pro-democracy camp right now, not just Democrats, but independents and Republicans who are sort of fed up. I mean, I've talked to lots of people who voted for Trump, and what is happening right now is not what they voted for. And so there has to be an alternative there where they can say, all right, I'm going to vote to check this president now. And that alternative can't be so different from their values in order, for them to vote for that person. And I just feel like this is such an important piece in order to, frankly, the goal is to protect our democracy right now. Because in my belief, and I think a lot of other people, the Republican Party is not the party of democracy. What's happening in our country with this bill that was just passed that added a ton of money to our debt, threw people off of healthcare, the rising prices, tariffs, the undemocratic things that you're seeing in our country. And I mean, just seriously, the deployment of our National Guard around cities is just appalling. And a lot of people get that, even if they voted for this, or they're longtime Republican voters, they sort of get that. So I feel like we have to keep working to provide an alternative that people can believe in.
We must. If we care about this country the way we say we do, we must, right?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Lauren, and really appreciate you and all the work that you do.
Likewise, Amy. So good to see you. Thanks again.
All right.